Black man forced to carry heavy bricks in freezing weather by cops, shocks everyone by firing them the next day. It was a freezing winter evening in a quiet, snow-covered town. The streets were empty except for a few people hurrying home, their faces tucked into scarves to shield them from the biting wind. Jack, a kind-hearted and hard-working black man, trudged along the icy road after a long, exhausting day at work. His breath came out in puffs of white mist, and he clutched an old, empty bag in his hand. It was his mother's bag, and he carried it everywhere as a reminder of her love and strength. Before we dive deeper into this powerful and emotional journey, take a moment to support us. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and thought-provoking stories that touch your heart. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a single update. We promise every story is worth your time. And like this video if you believe in justice, compassion, and the power of change. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter. Now, let's dive back in. Jack was tired, but his spirit was strong. He looked forward to getting home, where a warm meal and his favorite book waited for him. But tonight, the world had other plans for Jack. As he turned the corner onto a quieter street, two police officers appeared out of nowhere, their faces cold and hard like the icy wind. They stood in his path, blocking his way. Jack stopped, startled but polite. "Evening, officers," he said, his voice calm. One of the cops stepped closer, squinting at Jack with suspicion. "What's in the bag?" he asked sharply. "Just an empty bag," Jack replied, holding it open to show them. "I use it for carrying my things, but it's empty now." The second cop chuckled mockingly. "Empty, huh? Why are you out here so late, walking around with a bag? Up to no good, I bet." Jack shook his head. "I'm just heading home from work. I haven't done anything wrong." But the officers didn't listen. Instead, they exchanged a look, and one of them said, "We don't trust you. Let's see how strong you really are." Jack's heart sank as the cops gestured toward a pile of heavy bricks stacked near a construction site. "Pick those up," one of them barked. "What? Why?" Jack asked, his voice filled with confusion and fear. The second officer smirked. "Because we said so, and unless you want to spend the night in jail, you'll do what we tell you." Jack hesitated, his mind racing. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he knew he had no choice. The power the cops held over him was overwhelming. Slowly, he walked over to the pile of bricks. His hands, already stiff from the cold, trembled as he lifted one heavy brick after another. "Now carry them across the street and back. Don't drop them," one of the cops ordered. Jack did as he was told. The bricks were heavy, and the icy ground was slippery under his feet. Each step was a battle. His hands began to bleed as the rough edges of the bricks dug into his skin. His back ached, and the cold seeped into his bones, but he didn't stop. Passers-by started to gather, watching the cruel scene unfold. Some people whispered among themselves, while others pulled out their phones to record. But no one stepped in to help Jack. The cops laughed and jeered, making cruel jokes at Jack's expense. "Look at him struggle," one said, shaking his head. "He's lucky we're letting him off easy." Jack kept his head down and focused on each step. Inside, his heart burned with anger and sadness, but he refused to let it show. He whispered to himself, over and over, "This isn't the end. This isn't the end." The wind howled around him, and snowflakes fell onto his face, mixing with the sweat and tears he wouldn't let anyone see. Jack's pride and strength carried him forward, brick by painful brick. On that freezing night, as Jack struggled under the weight of the bricks, someone stood watching from the shadows. A man in a dark coat lingered near the corner of the street, unnoticed by the crowd. His piercing eyes followed every move, and his breath fogged in the cold air. He held a small notebook, scribbling down details with quick, deliberate strokes. He didn't speak or intervene, just watched, his face unreadable. Jack's body trembled as he carried another heavy brick across the icy street. His fingers, raw and bloody, could barely grip the rough edges. His knees wobbled, and his breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. With each step, the pain in his chest grew, and the cold seemed to cut through his skin like knives. Suddenly, Jack stumbled. His legs gave out, and he fell to the ground, the brick slipping from his hands and landing with a dull thud. The snow around him was stained red from his bleeding palms. He lay there for a moment, staring up at the dark sky, his chest heaving. "Get up!" one of the cops barked, his voice filled with annoyance. "You're not done yet." But Jack didn't move. His head tilted back, and he looked at the stars scattered across the night sky. They sparkled faintly, distant and indifferent to his suffering. Jack thought of his mother, her warm smile, her soothing voice. She had always taught him to be strong, to never let life's cruelty break him. Tears welled up in his eyes. One rolled down his cheek, warm against his frozen skin. "Mama," he whispered under his breath, "give me strength, please." For a moment, Jack wanted to give up. His body screamed for rest, and his spirit felt crushed under the weight of humiliation. But then something inside him shifted. He clenched his fists, feeling the sting of his wounded hands, and whispered to himself, "Not yet. I'm not done. This isn't the end." Slowly, with every ounce of strength he had left, Jack pushed himself back to his feet. The cops laughed at him, their mocking voices ringing through the cold night air. "Look at him. He thinks he's so tough," one sneered. "Keep moving, hero." As Jack bent down to pick up another brick, a small voice rang out from the crowd. "Why are you hurting him?" The crowd turned to see a young girl stepping forward. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old, with big, innocent eyes and a red balloon tied to her wrist. Her words, spoken with such simple honesty, hung in the air like a challenge. The cops froze for a moment, startled by the interruption. The girl stood there bravely, her gaze fixed on them. She didn't flinch even as the cold wind tugged at her coat. One of the officers recovered quickly and laughed. "Go home, kid. This has nothing to do with you." The other added with a smirk, "Yeah, beat it. Don't you have somewhere to be?" But the girl didn't move. She looked at Jack, who managed a faint smile despite his exhaustion. Her small act of courage gave him a spark of hope. The crowd began to murmur. Some people looked uncomfortable, glancing at each other as if realizing the cruelty of the situation. Others shuffled awkwardly, unsure whether to step in or walk away. In the shadows, the man in the dark coat scribbled something else in his notebook. His face remained serious, his eyes fixed on the scene. As the young girl stood her ground, the man muttered under his breath, "They'll answer for this tomorrow." Without another word, the man turned and walked away, his footsteps crunching softly in the snow. He disappeared into the night, leaving behind a mystery and a feeling that the story was far from over. Jack, still standing under the weight of the bricks, straightened his back slightly. His eyes met the little girl's, and he gave her a grateful nod. The moment didn't erase the pain or the humiliation, but it reminded Jack that he wasn't entirely alone. Somewhere out there, someone cared. The cops shouted again, breaking the moment, but Jack's spirit felt different now. He was no longer carrying the bricks just for himself. He was carrying them for everyone who had ever been wronged, for everyone who had ever been told they didn't matter. And deep in his heart, he knew this wasn't the end. Something was coming. The sun crept over the horizon, casting a pale glow over the town buried in snow. Jack woke up in his small apartment, his body aching from head to toe. His hands, bandaged and sore, throbbed with pain, and every movement reminded him of the humiliation he had endured the night before. Yet, as he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor, a flicker of determination sparked within him. "This isn't over," he whispered to himself. Jack spent the morning tending to his injuries and gathering his thoughts. He had no idea how to fight back or where to start, but he knew he couldn't let what happened go unchallenged. He glanced at his late mother's photo on the table and felt her presence, her unwavering strength urging him forward. Meanwhile, at the police station, the two cops who had tormented Jack laughed and joked about the night's events. "You should have seen his face," one said, mimicking Jack's struggle. Priceless. Their laughter was cut short when another officer entered, holding up a phone. "You might want to see this," he said, a hint of unease in his voice. The cops looked at the screen, their smiles fading as they watched a video of their actions from the night before. It had been posted online and was already spreading like wildfire. Comments poured in, condemning their behavior and calling for justice. Unaware of this brewing storm, Jack sat at his small kitchen table when his phone rang. He picked it up, surprised to see an unfamiliar number. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "Mr. Jack," a deep, calm voice replied. "My name is Marcus Hayes. I'm an investigator working on cases involving police misconduct. I believe we should talk." Jack's heart raced. "How do you know about me?" "I was there last night," Marcus said simply. "I saw everything. And so did the world." Jack was stunned into silence as Marcus explained who he was. A wealthy and powerful investigator, Marcus had been gathering evidence against corrupt officers in the area for months. Jack's case, with its public outcry and video evidence, was exactly what he needed to bring the issue to light. "Jack, your strength last night inspired many," Marcus continued. "I have a team ready to take this to court. Will you join us?" Jack hesitated for only a moment before saying, "Yes." Within hours, Jack found himself sitting in a courtroom, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Marcus had assembled a formidable team of lawyers and activists, all working to expose the corruption in the police force. The evidence against the two cops was overwhelming. Videos from bystanders, testimonies from witnesses, and even reports from their colleagues painted a damning picture. Jack sat silently, his heart pounding as he listened to the arguments unfold. The turning point came when the judge, a stern but fair woman, looked directly at Jack. "Mr. Jack," she said, her voice firm yet compassionate, "you have shown incredible resilience in the face of injustice. This court acknowledges not only your pain but also your courage. It's clear that changes are needed in our community, and I believe you are uniquely suited to lead that change." Jack's eyes widened in disbelief as the judge continued. "I am appointing you as the head of an independent committee to oversee police accountability in this town. Your voice will ensure fairness and justice for others." The courtroom erupted in murmurs, with some expressing shock and others nodding in agreement. Jack could hardly believe what he was hearing. Later that day, Jack found himself standing in a grand room, dressed in an elegant suit provided by Marcus's team. His wounds were hidden under the fabric, but his resolve shone through. The two cops were brought in, looking confused and uneasy. They hadn't been told why they were summoned. When they entered the room and saw Jack standing at the head of the table, their faces turned pale. Jack met their eyes, his expression calm but unyielding. He wasn't the same man who had carried bricks in the cold. He was stronger now, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced or oppressed. The tension in the room was thick as Jack prepared to speak, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had endured. The cops shifted nervously, knowing that whatever happened next would change their lives forever. And Jack, with his new position and newfound power, was ready to deliver justice. The grand room was filled with silence as Jack stood at the head of the table. His posture was steady, his face calm but resolute. The two cops, now seated across from him, shifted uncomfortably. They avoided his gaze, their earlier arrogance replaced by visible unease. The air in the room was heavy as Jack spoke. His voice was steady, but carried the weight of everything he had endured. "Last night," he began, "you forced me to carry bricks in the freezing cold. You humiliated me, mocked me, and broke the trust this community should have in its protectors. But today, the tables have turned, not for revenge, but for justice." The cops opened their mouths to defend themselves. One stammered, "We didn't mean for it to go this far." It was just. Jack raised a hand to silence him. "Enough," he said firmly. "The evidence speaks for itself." On the table in front of him were the videos and testimonies that had been presented in court. The images of Jack struggling under the weight of the bricks, the mocking laughter of the cops, and the innocent voice of the little girl asking, "Why are you hurting him?" were undeniable. Jack continued, his voice softening. "I could use my new position to destroy your careers, to make you feel what I felt. But I won't. Because I've learned that true strength isn't about tearing others down. It's about building something better." The room was silent except for the sound of a few people sniffling. Marcus Hayes, standing quietly in the corner, nodded in approval. Jack looked directly at the two cops. His eyes weren't filled with anger, but with an unexpected compassion. "I forgive you," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. However, forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences." The cops looked up, confusion mixed with relief on their faces. But Jack wasn't finished. "You will be sentenced to community service. You will work in the same neighborhoods you've neglected, under my supervision. You will rebuild the trust you've broken, brick by brick." The officers nodded, their heads bowed in shame. For the first time, it seemed they truly understood the gravity of their actions. The room erupted in quiet applause, not for the punishment, but for Jack's grace and leadership. He had shown that justice could be fair and compassionate. In the days that followed, Jack fully embraced his new role as the head of the Police Accountability Committee. He reviewed cases, organized community meetings, and listened to the voices of people who had long been ignored. One afternoon, as he worked in his office, there was a knock at the door. He looked up to see a young girl standing there, holding a red balloon. Behind her was a woman, her mother, who smiled warmly. The girl walked up to Jack and handed him a piece of paper with a crayon drawing of a man carrying bricks. Above it, she had written in wobbly letters, "You are strong." Jack felt his throat tighten as he knelt down to her level. "Thank you," he said softly. "You were brave that night. You reminded me that even the smallest voices can make a big difference." The girl's mother spoke, her voice filled with emotion. "We wanted to thank you, not just for standing up to those officers, but for showing the whole town what it means to forgive and lead with kindness." Inspired by the encounter, Jack decided to take things a step further. He started a foundation dedicated to protecting children's rights and empowering young voices in the community. He named it after his mother, ensuring her legacy of love and strength would live on. Late one evening, as Jack sat alone in his office, reflecting on how far he had come, an envelope arrived. The handwriting was neat and precise, and Jack immediately recognized it as Marcus Hayes. Inside was a single note. It read, "The world is full of bricks. How you carry them defines you. Keep building." Jack smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and purpose. He folded the note carefully and placed it next to the crayon drawing of the girl's balloon. Jack knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be more bricks to carry, more struggles to face. But he also knew that with every brick, he could build something stronger, something better, for himself, for his community, and for those who would come after him. And so, Jack rose from his desk, ready to keep building. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible journey of justice, redemption, and karma. If you are inspired by this story and want to see more powerful narratives that reveal the strength of character and the impact of standing up for what's right, subscribe to our channel to never miss a moment of these gripping tales. Hit the notification bell so you're always the first to know when a new story drops. And like this video if you believe in the power of justice, karma, and the courage to make a difference. Your support means everything and helps us continue bringing you stories that matter. Until next time, keep believing in the power of change.